any more time for questions. So once again, thank you very much. Yes, two more very interesting thing with the Esters one. One platform that APOFK established is the knowledge fair, where the conference organized in the village. So all the researchers goes to the village, stay with the villagers, and then we talk about it. And in this conference, we also have a reversal fair. We are going to Bawangasan the third day, and to better understand what are the community issues. So I think that will also help. And second one is that we are also developing some tools to help how the policymakers know what is on the ground, the situation with the technology. So moving forward, I think we have a very good picture now what's happening in Sarawak and in terms of a figure. So let's go to the next level in Malaysia. What is happening? So we have Rachel, Dr. Rachel Gong with us. She's a Deputy Director of Research in Khazanah Research Institute. The most important thing is that we were looking at during COVID on this digital connectivity issues in Malaysia. So we start looking on the organization to connect, and we connected with the APC, and APC said, oh, there is Dr. Rachel Gong from Khazanah. She is one of the editor or author of the book, which is The Networked Nation, Navigating Challenges, Realizing Opportunities of Digital Transformation in Malaysia. It's a very interesting book, open source. I think many of the chapters you can access it. So that was one of our aspiration to work on this issue and to know better what is the situation. So I will invite Dr. Rachel Gong to talk about the digital connectivity, building a foundation for digital transformation, and give us a perspective of Malaysian context.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kay. Thank you, Tariq, for that wonderful introduction. And what an honor to listen and to hear from the practitioner perspective of Dr. Khairuddin. For sure, e-bio is something that everybody talks about, and very interesting to hear really the challenges of being on the ground and what it was like to try and make that happen. So let me say, first of all, let me begin by, of course, thanking Dr. Tariq and his team for the invitation to be here to share a little bit more from the sort of high-level policy side, what is happening in Malaysia, which I hope will be a good backdrop and a complement to the practitioner perspective that was just shared. Coming from Khazanah Research Institute, so let me give a little backdrop to that as well. We are an organization sponsored by the Khazanah Nasional Berhad, and we are a not-for-profit organization incorporated as a company limited by guarantee. The objective of KRI is to undertake analysis and research on pressing national issues to propose actionable policy options and recommendations. So we work on a number of policy issues ranging from housing, labor, social protections, public health, agriculture, climate, and I lead the team that works on digital policy. So very similar to what Dr. Khairuddin was saying, with respect to digital policy, we actually take the position that digital transformation and digitalization is an all-of-society process. So it needs to take into account social well-being and human rights, as well as the economic and business development and growth. So having a digital society mindset, what that means is that we have to think about how we can recognize the challenges facing a digital society cannot be solved just with technical issues, but also with social solutions. So not just the digital, but the analog, exactly as what was being said. And thus inclusive and future-proof public policies are really the key to Malaysia's digital transformation. So what I hope to do today is to reinforce this idea that really the human aspect of digital connectivity, not just the technological and technical side, is what is going to drive true digital transformation. And so we can build all the underwater cables and the telecommunications towers in rainforests and deserts and mountains, but if we do not ensure that communities are able to use, to adapt, and to innovate these technologies in ways that are useful and meaningful to them, then we will not be able to realize the potential of digital transformation. So the book that Dr. Tariq alluded to earlier, called Network Nation, is something that we produced last year. Given this slightly counterintuitive idea that people and not technology is at the heart of digital transformation, much of our work actually focuses on strengthening two policy objectives: digital inclusion and digital governance. And again, as Dr. Khairuddin was saying, it may seem like Malaysia's national internet penetration levels are high at about 130% of the population, but our research shows that the digital divides by state are correlated with average household income of the state, and reveals that even in urban areas where internet coverage is high, the penetration rates are high, but the user experience is poor, with inconsistent and low speeds, even in Peninsular Malaysia. So we also find that this digital divide occurs not just at the household level, but also at the firms level, which leaves many micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises behind. And at the worker level, leaving many informal and platform workers with less access to digital tools and with fewer digital skills at a disadvantage. So closing these gaps are all part of the foundation that is needed for inclusive digital transformation. And as we close these gaps, I think it's important for us to be looking forward to the future and thinking about how these technologies are going to be governed, and particularly now with respect with data and with artificial intelligence. So digital technologies both consume and produce vast quantities of data, and all the big data analysis and the predictive algorithms that are used are a big part of our reality, not just for businesses, but for society, for education, for communication, for socializing. All the complex analysis that is being used to predict what kind of restaurants we want to go to, all these actually uncover hidden biases in the data. And these are turning out to have a larger impact on predictive algorithms and decision making than what we would otherwise have expected. Data may first have been commodified by the private sector, but the public sector will find data increasingly necessary to deliver all these services, including connectivity. So the use of data to develop digital or data intelligence requires good governance to ensure equitable, non-exploitative use of data in the public interest. When industry experts and technologists talk about the promise of the future of the internet, they talk about the metaverse, they talk about blockchain, they drop all these buzzwords, Web3 and so on. They actually have already assumed that there is universal digital access and high-quality universal digital access. So in fact, some policymakers will speak of this tech utopia, where, for example, the agricultural sector is an example of the fusion of technologies. A 4IR-ready farmer will oversee a fleet of sensors and robots and grow tailor-made crops packed with nutrition. The fresh produce will be purchased by consumers from the comfort of their own homes, enabled by the internet and peer-to-peer business model platforms. Instead of in-person collection, autonomous vehicles will transport the goods without the need for human travel. Though this scenario may still be years away from some parts of the world, in many places it's already commonplace. This is a direct quote from one of our national policies. This is the National 4R policy released next July, and it tells of the country's aspirations to reach this techno-utopia. When on the ground, we can see the challenges of getting basic connectivity done for rural and remote areas. So where is all this coming from when they can't even get to the basic stage? And that's a question where I hope that participatory design can bridge this gap between these ambitions at the national level and really what communities on the ground want. Is this, in fact, something that is wanted by communities on the ground? So if we have any real hopes of reaching any of these stages described in here, and I think it's still worth asking if we do want to reach such a stage, we need to begin by setting digital inclusion as a policy goal and find feasible and practical ways of improving digital connectivity, affordability, and competencies. So the National 4IR policy is one of many digital and technology policies, roadmaps, and blueprints that have been released in the last few years. Here I show you a few others, all with the aim of ensuring that Malaysia's digital economy can grow and thrive. All of them, really at the end of the day, rest on the success of Jendela, Jalanan Digital Negara, or the National Digital Network, which is a 5-year action plan aimed at improving national broadband coverage. And essentially what this plan hopes to do, besides its target, as Dr. Khalid said, it's got a very sort of interesting metric of increasing 4G coverage from 91.8% of populated areas to 96.9%. And this number, to the best of my understanding, seems like an entirely arbitrary number. Why 96.9%? Why not 100%? Why not 97.2%? It's unclear why they've decided on this as a target, but it's there as a metric to indicate, okay, we have done this much work, we put up this much tower, this is the coverage that we can show. And in fact, JENDELA is showing that it is on track to reach this target. This target has been met for the 2021 to 2022 sort of timeline of KPIs that they're going for. So besides increasing that 4G coverage, what they're also trying to do is increase the average mobile download speed from 25 megabits per second to 35 megabits per second. And again, this is measured actually at the base of the tower, not from any user experience in town. And the third goal that they're trying to do is to sunset 3G to free up spectrum allocation for 5G. And now it becomes clear that really what JENDELA is trying to do is not necessarily looking out for social well-being and digital connectivity first, but hoping to grow the digital economy. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's important that we look ahead. It's important that we try and get 5G going. But if we're not bringing everyone with us, if we're not being inclusive about it, all the aspirations for 5G, all the remote sensors and all that will not be fully appreciated by the majority of the population. And then we have to ask ourselves, what was the point of that policy? So I won't go into the details of the single wholesale network and those rollout plans for 5G and the complications around that, but suffice it to say that the orientation of all these policies, I feel, needs to be adjusted a little bit from economic first to society first. And I would argue that a public with high digital literacies and high digital competencies are really what is needed beyond just having towers and connectivity to ensure that all these plans for digital transformation can come to fruition. So then let's define what I mean by digital inclusion. Digital inclusion is a broad policy-driven approach towards ensuring that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and use of ICTs. And this will involve building infrastructure, of course, to support affordable, robust broadband services, providing or ensuring that secure internet-enabled devices that meet users' needs are available, providing access to digital literacy training and quality technical support to those who need it, designing applications and online content that support self-sufficiency or what the community deems fit for purpose, and protecting digital rights. So given how quickly digital technologies evolve, digital inclusion is a moving target that requires intentional strategies and investments to reduce and eliminate historical, institutional, and structural barriers to technology access. Digital inclusion is about more than closing the digital divide. We can build all the infrastructure and improve network performance, but if we don't have devices and apps that are workable, if we don't have people who understand how they can benefit from them, digital inclusion is not accomplished. From a policy perspective, digital inclusion requires social solutions, addressing social inequalities, rethinking how social norms and social behaviors translate from the offline world into a digital-first world, and thinking proactively about the societal implications of digitalization on things like education, healthcare, and social cohesion. From a citizen or a community perspective, digital inclusion means having digital technologies that are fit for purpose with easy-to-use user interface and user experiences. Protections and privacy need to be built in by design, and I'm not talking about just apps, but for the ecosystem as a whole, and particularly for rural and remote communities, technology needs to be resilient and sustainable. It would be folly to expect that at the national level, policy can address all these diverse local needs. And who would better understand these needs more than local communities themselves? Thus, it is really important for there to be stakeholders engaging from within the communities towards government. So when we think practically about digital inclusion and meaningful connectivity in Malaysia, we can start by looking at three areas: access, affordability, and application, which are fairly similar to what the World Bank had put out with its digital dividends. First, let's think about access. Is there infrastructure and services that will allow everyone to connect to the internet? The government reported in June of this year, June 2022, that 86.9% of Sabah now has 4G coverage. MCMC also reports that as at quarter 4 of last year, 2021, mobile internet penetration in Sabah is 92%. But again, we all know how difficult it is in practice to actually receive these technologies, these connectivities, and to actually be able to use it. So what does this mean for the average Sabahan? Does this align with the lived experience of people in Sabah who are trying to get online? And for those who are already online, is the mobile performance that they are receiving of sufficient quality and standards for them? Similarly, in Sarawak, at the end of 2021, we saw some of the stats earlier from quarter 3, so I'll just give a slight update on that for quarter 4. Mobile internet penetration stands at 113%, compared to the national rate of 128%. 29% of premises in Sarawak have fixed broadband, compared to 41% nationally. So this lower fixed broadband rate really just reflects Malaysia's mobile-first connectivity. And on average, computers are a little too expensive for each member of the household to have one, while smartphones are much more affordable. And so it must be noted that despite saying that, some of the more expensive smartphones are actually more expensive than some of the more budget-friendly laptops. So there's also that, range to take into account. But that actually segues us nicely into affordability. Can everyone afford to buy a device and pay for a regular data plan? During the pandemic, the government developed 2 initiatives to disperse laptops and tablets to students who needed them. And while this is helpful, it is not sustainable and it is not inclusive, and particularly because the government actually distributed these laptops not for ownership, but as a loan. So students were expected to return them after they were finished with their studies. So the question is, how are we going to be able to make devices going forward that are going to be affordable for people while being of sufficient quality and security, that we don't put the onus of protecting privacy and protecting and not falling for scams on the individual user? How do we build that into design? And that has to be a part of the policy conversation as well. I think it remains an open question whether the economic system as we know it will continue to privilege productivity on bigger devices such as computers and tablets and big machinery with better processors, or if as more and more developing countries go into mobile first, if we will start to see a shift in terms of productivity moving towards apps and things that can be controlled on a smartphone. And if that happens, what this will mean for how we think about connectivity in terms of fixed broadband and mobile broadband. And so on to the third aspect of meaningful connectivity, application. So what exactly is meaningful connectivity? And I'm aware that there may be some concerns around how this term gets defined and what it means. So there's an organization, a coalition rather, called the Alliance for Affordable Internet, made up of international businesses, governments, and civil society. And their objective is a more affordable internet for everyone. And then we can debate the sort of motivations behind their objective, but they define meaningful connectivity as a measure of quality of one's internet experience. So they are moving from quality of service, QoS, which is the towers and the connectivity speeds provided and reported by the telcos, into QoE, the quality of experience as reported by the users. So I think that's a helpful measure, that's a helpful move forward. It's not perfect, but it certainly gets us a little bit further towards understanding connectivity than it would if we measured just towers and connectivity speeds. So as mentioned earlier, JENDELA's targets on reaching 96.9% of broadband coverage in populated areas and the sunsetting of 5G, those are metrics that would be more reflective of QoS. And so moving to the QoE standards is something that is positive, but it's as yet unclear how the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission actually intends to implement some of these ideas. They have indicated that they are moving towards QoE as well, QoE measurements, but exactly how they will go out and survey that remains to be seen. Because with QoS, it was simple to just get internet service providers to report what their numbers were. But going out and measuring the user experience is now going to prove a little bit of a challenge for them. All that said, I suspect that there is some value to redefining meaningful connectivity from just metrics into a little bit of that fuzzy understanding of what it is that communities will find purposeful and meaningful for them. So meaningful connectivity can be conceptualized in terms of how being connected is part of the way we navigate the world now, not for specific intents and purposes such as business or education, but just as part of our everyday life. And what does that mean in the way that we socialize? What does it mean in the way we form relationships? What does that mean in the way we stay connected to family and so on? A little bit fuzzy, but then again, I think quite a number of the things that we find meaningful in life are a little bit fuzzy. Let me turn from things that are a little bit fuzzy to giving some statistics. I want to talk a little bit now, and recognizing that I'm coming from the perspective of an urban internet worker, and so I look forward to hearing what some of the other communities will be sharing about what meaningful connectivity means to them. These numbers come from Department of Statistics Malaysia, DOSM's annual survey on ICT use and access by individuals and households. And these numbers come from the latest one done in the fourth quarter of 2021. So, good news first. 96% of households across the country have some form of internet access. And this is an answer to the question, has there been anyone in the household who has accessed the internet in the last 3 months? So it would be surprising, I think, in this day and age for somebody to say no. Out of these 96%, 97% of urban households have internet access and 89% of rural households. In Sarawak, this translates to 89% of all households with internet access, 97% in urban areas, and 76% of rural households. So we see that Sarawak has a bigger urban-rural digital divide than the country overall, and that's less good. But returning to slightly more positive reports, the gender gap appears to be narrowing, assuming that the surveys were representative. 46% of internet users in 2020 were women, which is up from 41% in 2018. And this gap actually widened a little bit from 2016 to 2018. So it's good to see that it has closed a little bit in 2020. So too, the age gap is closing, and we see more and more seniors coming online. Last year, in 2021, 76% of rural households had access to a computer. This may seem relatively low given that 91% of households in urban areas had access to a computer, but again, it reinforces Malaysia's mobile-first connectivity. And when you compare it to the fact that in 2020, only 56% of rural households had access to a computer. So that's quite a jump from 56% to 76% in just 1 year, and that's something positive. But is this improvement in connectivity and device access enough to be the foundation of digital transformation in Malaysia? There was a lot of pivoting to online and digitalizing different processes around education and work that happened during the early stages of the pandemic, but we see that quite a number of people remain left behind. From statistics taken up to October 2021, schools in Malaysia were closed for 42 weeks since the start of the pandemic. This is the third highest in Southeast Asia, behind Cambodia and Myanmar, and the losses felt by students due to this closure have not yet been addressed. A World Bank simulation study estimated that this would mean up to 1.3 additional years of learning loss for Malaysian students. Although the government distributed 150,000 laptops and distributed many tablets through the Peranti Siswa Keluarga Malaysia program, students, especially those in rural and remote areas, still report challenges with online learning. Approximately 77% of students surveyed could not easily pivot to online classes due to limited digital resources at home, either in terms of devices or data plans. And of course, this disadvantage was disproportionately borne by students from low-income households. Estimates also suggested that about 28%, one quarter of jobs in Malaysia can be done remotely, compared to about 37% of US jobs. And as many workers were laid off or underemployed due to pandemic constraints, the government made efforts to offer reskilling and upskilling trainings for job seekers, especially helping to improve their digital skills. I don't have the statistics on the actual take-up rates of all these trainings, but if history is any indicator, the participation rate is unlikely to exceed 25%, which means here again the government has offered policy options and incentives and programs that are not being well received by the community that they're intending to target. The challenge to grow remote work in Malaysia too is something that national policymakers are looking at, trying to introduce a digital nomad program. But again, these options are coming from high level with a lot of private sector involvement and consultations, and may not have actually involved the discussions from workers and employers who would be tasked with actually implementing this policy. Many digital jobs can actually be done remotely, specifically talking about digital jobs here, and vacancies for these jobs increased 3.5 times from 2020 to 2021. However, the Malaysian Department of Statistics estimates that the youth employment rate, people who should be able to take up these jobs, having been trained and being digitally native, is actually over 3 times the national unemployment rate of 4.3% at 13.9%, almost 14%. A skills mismatch between job seekers and employers remains an issue, and dissatisfaction in the workplace is an emerging concern. Facing pressures to digitalize and automate, employers, and again mostly small and medium level enterprises here, are likely to face more challenges finding suitable workers and keeping them given the pandemic constraints. One solution is to involve employers and workers engaging in participatory design to develop processes and ecosystems that would allow them to do their jobs and thrive under these new digital conditions. For example, starting September 1st, an amendment to the Employment Act will technically allow employees to apply for flexible working arrangements, but without buy-in and participatory design at the institute and organizational level, this amendment is more likely, this policy and introduction of this policy is more likely to frustrate employers and employees than it is to help them. And thus we see a little bit of the value, or I'm starting to see a little bit of the value of participatory design in policy making. And I know I have much to learn about this, and I'm looking forward to that. But I can see how it aligns with some of the recommendations that Kiara is making towards getting policymakers to really take account of what the local community and local stakeholders are looking for. One of our big recommendations to policymakers is getting more diverse stakeholders involved in the decision-making process, particularly minorities and those who have been traditionally less represented in this process. So participatory design has the potential to bridge knowledge gaps by providing alternative means for community representatives to engage in the policy-making process. And I think one way to do that, which I would think is quite important, I would like to see a shift in these community engagements away from focus groups and towards more long-term committee appointments in technical committees. So what currently happens is that policymakers tend to where they do, on the rare occasions that they do go out into the field and go to ground, is they'll hold a focus group. They talk to people for 3 hours, 6 hours, maybe they'll do it 2 or 3 times with different communities, and that's it. They do that, they leave, they go back into their offices, and they develop their policies. Where we would like to see some meaningful change, I think, is in having community representatives actually be appointed to the technical committees working on these processes, so that they can be involved in the long-term conversations, so that there can be information flow back and forth on a longer term between the government and the communities that they're trying to target. So again, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it would be a start towards getting participatory design involved in policy making. Similarly, I think increasing the diversity of representation in those communities. There's often quite a lot of age and experience and men of a majority race at the table. And perhaps it's time that we made some room for the traditionally underrepresented. Women, orang asli, orang asal, even the youth, young people, and persons with disabilities. I think participatory design has the potential to improve public communications in both ways. We've seen recently in Malaysia how the Ministry of Health struggled with public communication of the use of My Sejahtera for contact tracing, the things that developed as a result of the procurement not being transparent. And now, as they intend to further expand My Sejahtera's use to track lifelong vaccine and health screening results, communication for this, which I think is technically a good thing and could bring a lot of improvements to e-health, needs to be done better. And having, again, a community representative who can talk about the community's needs and concerns as part of that decision-making deployment and enforcement process would be something that would be very helpful to policymakers. So let me close with a little bit on principles for inclusive design policies that I hope can go into those conversations as well. As I've mentioned, digital transformation has to go beyond simply digitization, which is just making analog things digital and scanning documents and putting them in archives. Nor should digital literacy be limited to highly trained technical people or specific sectors of the economy. Digital transformation in this late and post-pandemic world requires considering how the use of digital technologies is going to transform everyday life, from communication to education, finding a job, finding a spouse. We have to expand our thinking on digital technologies and go beyond the digital economy to digital society. So some of the principles that I think are fundamental to this are, number one, inclusive design. We need technological tools that can be meaningfully used by all groups of people, including and especially the vulnerable and disenfranchised. For example, in multilingual Malaysia, having translations into multiple languages available on government websites, beyond just BM and English in the peninsula, but in Sabah and Sarawak, perhaps having indigenous languages available as well, would be quite helpful. We need a better design of apps, yes, but this is also about the entire process and system as information flows from the end user to the government and back. Second principle, prioritizing the user perspective. Digital transformation should benefit everyone, not just the elite and the business people of society, and more attention should be paid to the user experience. Policymakers have to walk a fine line between not being left behind as a nation and not leaving anyone behind in their constituencies. But in my opinion, to adopt cutting-edge technologies that only a few can benefit from, instead of perhaps the less exciting option that fulfills a larger need, seems like perhaps the less wise policy choice. For example, there's talk of introducing blockchain in order to track the production of rice from farm to market, from farm to customer, to end user. But really, perhaps what is of bigger concern to farmers is ensuring that logistics can happen more efficiently so that rice is not wasted. And the focus on the use of blockchain rather than on improving logistics is a policy decision that's made without the input of the community. The third principle is good governance. And this covers really everything that ranges from making systems interoperable and secure to ensuring that data, especially personal data, we talked about e-health a little bit, are being properly managed and protected. This is no longer just a national issue, as servers may sit in different countries, and what is being protected is not where the data sits, but access to the data, and requires cross-border regulations in a globally networked world. And finally, I think the key to policy, public policy interest, which is sometimes forgotten in the midst of developing economic policy, is prioritizing the public interest. I think we must be wary of policies that privilege the private sector at the expense of the general public, especially when it comes to building public infrastructure. It's true that many of the digital apps and the technologies that we are familiar with are private sector innovations, but the backbone of the technologies that run on were largely developed and largely built using public funds. And so it is public interest and social well-being we need to prioritize now as we try to emerge and recover from the pandemic. And that brings me, I think, to the end of what I have to say today. Thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to hearing from you, your thoughts and comments throughout the conference, and I wish you all the best at this conference. I hope it will be enjoyable and educational for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I really love to hear you always whenever you are here. Like last time even, you really broaden up the whole discussion from the academic to really to practice and to the research side also, and to the policy. So let's have some question first. Are there any question? We still have good time actually, 10-15 minutes. So again, Esther. Esther, would you like to also introduce yourself first? No. You need to click double, 2 times the button. Here is the button, 2 times.
Not always trustworthy.
No, it's fine. It's all the human who knows it or not. Yes. Yeah, we can hear it now. Yes, it's okay. We can.
point out about the good governance part. I really appreciate that. This link to my question, the previous question that was posted by Dr. Hamid. In his PowerPoint, he pointed out, if you are not online, are you out of the game? So actually, I do have this doubt for a very long time because I'm not a native digital generation. I always feel like, why do I need to conform to this big bully digital system? It's like a digital imperialism, I appreciate the conveniences and the benefits and the justice is being brought up. So you were talking about inclusion. So I wonder, can we provide alternative to the do not want to be included question? So because I myself, coming from psychology and educational background, and my personal experience, if 1 week without any, digital, any media, my quality of life and the wonder towards the nature and human connection are deepened. So I do want to ask this question to, national level. Do you consider, is there a way to build up this kind of, equality to everyone?
Yes, I think it's on.
Still on? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Wow, what a great question. I think here, let me try and give some context first, and then I'll try to get into what I think is the heart of the question. I think the way trends are going, broad societal trends, is that we are moving towards heavy dependence on digital technologies. In the same way that before, people might have said, well, I don't need to install indoor plumbing. I don't need electricity in my house. I just burn a candle, it's fine. There's, build something outside the house for hygiene and all that, that's okay. But just the trends in general push the world, push society towards having indoor plumbing and lights and things like that. And I think trends will move us towards being more connected. So that's one just thing that's happening that will push that. The second thing that then kind of further reinforces that is government policies that say things like, okay, we want cashless payments everywhere. The government of Malaysia, 80% cashless. Is it 80% cashless? Maybe 80% cloud computing. Sorry, I have to look up the statistics. But they have a cashless target for public services by a certain date. And when you make government policy like that and you say, look, we're going to institute this from the top down, it becomes easier for enterprises to sort of go, okay, well, if I'm already doing that for this, I might as well do it for everything else. And then suddenly the dependence on digital technologies increases. So what it will take, and this is something that we try to advocate for as well in our digital inclusion efforts, is that there must be redundancies. There must be backups. What happens, even if everybody wants to use a digital system, but what happens if the system fails? Are you going to allow a single point of failure where now the whole office or the whole department, public service department, has lost its internet connection and then we can't do anything anymore? No, we need a redundancy for that. And so that redundancy will also help cover people who perhaps don't want to use digital services. This admittedly requires, number one, much more work from policymakers and public agencies, developers, everybody who is trying to set this up and create redundancies. But number two, it also means that the individual user at the end will have to face the choice of, okay, I know I will lose out a little bit in terms of what kind of options and access and facilities I have. And if I decide that for me it's worth that, that's fine at an individual level. But on the sort of general policy and broader ecosystem, I think the redundancies to ensure that there's no single point of failure are really more key towards inclusion than being able to address any particular individual who feels like they don't want to be part of that, if that makes sense.
And just to add to Rachel's comments also, for Sarawak, Estonia is one of the examples, and there is a very good example if you look at the Estonian model with all 99.9% digitization. They still have a space for those people who don't want to go for the digital and still want to rely on the manual sort of all the processes. Any more questions? Yes, there is one hand here. Can you please also introduce yourself? Actually, I also tried with that one. There is some skills part on our side that you need to click double the button. It's not just on and off. Yes.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for the presentation. My name is Ajibola Victor from Unimas. So thank you again. Your presentation actually answered a part of my previous question. So because Sarawak, as we know, have a very rigorous digital economy strategy. And the first presentation and even yours was talking specifically about infrastructure and digital divide. Though you made mention of digital competency, which is my main concern, because currently that's where I'm working. My research is based on digital competency and literacy. If you look at previous studies or researches on digital divide, they classify infrastructure as the first one. Most economy, especially those dealing with digital economy now, they have moved past the infrastructural aspect of digital divide. Now they are talking of digital divide in terms of digital competency. So from my current research, Sarawak has a very robust digital strategy launched in 2018, which actually expired this year, 2022. I'm not sure they have a means of measuring that. So my basic question is, because we are developing a digital competency model framework to measure the competency basically in Sarawak, since we cannot just base a digital economy based on infrastructure. You can't even harness all the digital dividends only based on availability of infrastructure. So what I just wanted to ask is, can a digital economy be measured only on infrastructure without considering the digital competency aspect of the citizens? That's my, just want more light on that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Let me try to see if I can break that down a little bit.
Okay.
How is the digital economy sort of measured? Is there a measure of digital competencies that goes into that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so right now, I will say, I think we at, or certainly I, at KRI, I have questions about the way the digital economy is measured in Malaysia. Right now, really what it tries to measure when we look at the statistical numbers is it measures e-commerce, and then it measures what really the metric developed in the 1990s around ICT services. So it measures things like, database administration and services and things like that. And of late, in the last, I think, since 2018, but really around the pandemic, there has been a shift towards trying to incorporate data skills and data sciences into this understanding of the digital economy. But I think it's still challenging because these days, again, everything that involves digitalization, do you technically consider that part of the digital economy? Where do you draw the line, right? And what makes digital economy? So that's already one question that we struggle with, let alone to introduce the metrics of digital competencies into that. So, very big challenges there. I don't know if digital competencies are going to be a part of whatever new metric they're using. I know data sciences as a field and digital marketing is coming into the question of digital economy, but on digital competencies, I'm not sure that metric comes in. What I will say is that at least MDEC, the Malaysian Digital Economic Corporation, has done surveys with employers to assess competencies. And their assessments, again, they're asking employers, so that is the perspective that the employers are coming up with, and they're saying that, employees are not quite, don't quite have the digital skills that the employers would like. And so I highlight some of the work that we've done. Chapter 3 of our book looks at digital platform work. So here we're not even looking at what the MDEC is surveying in terms of professional employers of digital workers. We're looking at the platform workers, the informal sector, and trying to understand what their digital competencies are like. And I will say it is a little bit lacking because of the data that we had for this study, and we used 2017 to 2019 data. By metrics of digital competencies, what they're measuring here is what the respondents said in answer to the question, are you comfortable with email? Are you comfortable with a browser? Are you comfortable with Facebook? Are you comfortable with YouTube? And are you comfortable with PayPal? So these were metrics of digital competencies that clearly need revision and revising. So I'm sure the work that you're doing will be quite helpful in moving towards that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's also highlighting here from today's two speakers that how many opportunities and questions are there where our research community can actually help, and especially the PhD and master students who are looking for more research and community-based, participatory, grounded, empirical research. How many questions are there open for all of us, which we can actually really explore, can explore it and contribute back to Sarawak and to Malaysia. Is there any more question? Okay, if there is no more question, thank you very much, Rachel. So for the next program, what we are going to be, we are having 10 minutes break in between. I want to just highlight one thing, Gary, that tree we just now show or later? Okay, after the break. That tree, the knowledge tree we show now or after the break? Okay, so yeah, I take the opportunity of these 2-3 minutes in between. So the session that which is happening, maybe there are thoughts in your mind. Do you have any ideas? Do you have any reflection? Anything like that? That's how we use our WhatsApp. Yeah. So we have this knowledge tree, which is placed in the exhibition place later on. After the lunch break and MOU exchange. So many of you will be going to the exhibition to see the FYP student and our research, some of the research projects. So there is also this knowledge tree. From today's session, if there is any idea in your mind, if there is any thoughts in your mind, if you have any reflection, can you please put your thoughts on this knowledge tree in terms of leaf, in terms of fruit, in terms of bark? Just consider it. This is like a way of expression towards looking at this all digital connectivity or internet connectivity challenges, issues, opportunities in Malaysia and in the state. So thank you very much. Let's have 10 minutes quick break, and after that we are coming back to listen Adrian Won from Internet Society. And you have 10 minutes, you want to quickly Google what is Internet Society. But there are a lot of interesting things with the Internet Society. And then also with the Sarbani Banerjee. Adrian is coming all the way from Singapore. Sarbani is coming is here with us from India. She is from Association for Progressive Communication. Let's meet after at 11:10. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.